Well, thank you all so much for joining me once again for session 4 of Self-Publishing for Ministry Professionals. Honestly, I can't tell you how much fun this has been to do this course. I have learned a lot through it, and I hope that you're picking up some things as well. I especially appreciate those of you who are interacting in the Facebook group and sharing there. That is a super huge encouragement to me, and I hope it's an encouragement to you as well. So tonight is kind of an interesting topic because we're going to dive in to a topic that not a lot of people get really excited about, and that is the topic of editing. Let's review what we did last week. Last week we talked about the issue of time, specifically how to carve out space in your life to write. And we talked about 4 reasons why we feel so busy many times, and also we talked about 21 practical strategies to make time to write. And hopefully you took away some practical strategies last week and worked on a couple of those over the past week. Here's the homework from last week, and hopefully you dove into this and were able to do some of this. I asked you to choose 1 or 2 of the practical strategies that we talked about last week for making time to write, and hopefully you put those into practice. And also I asked you to share those in the Facebook group, and some of you did that, which is awesome. And then also I sent you over email, hopefully you all received this, a bonus Evernote course and a book. And I'm hoping and praying that I didn't overwhelm you with that, but I just wanted you to have that if you want to go through it. Certainly there's no pressure to or anything like that. It's kind of a side thing, but I do think Evernote is a wonderful resource. So that's there if you want to take advantage of that. And also just a reminder, if you want to access the replays and the resources, kentsanders.net/selfpubcourse. The password is selfpub2016. Let's dive into tonight's topic, which is the topic of editing. And let me kind of say right up front that this may be the least exciting topic of all these 6 courses because, you know, thinking about your purpose and your book topic and your goals, all that's really exciting. Putting your book on Kindle is exciting. The marketing stuff, well, some people don't think that's exciting. I think it's exciting. But when people think of editing, they don't typically get really excited about that. And the reason is because we think of editing as kind of a drudgery or as something to endure or, you know, like this absolute torture. But I don't really think of it that way. I think of editing as where the magic really happens in writing and particularly in self-publishing. And I want to explain why I believe that's the case tonight, and hopefully you'll come away with some new thoughts and new information about editing, but also some practical strategies to begin editing your own stuff. Here's our learning objectives for this evening. Number 1 is to understand and appreciate the editing process and put it into practice, most importantly. Number 2 is to understand the importance of cover design for your book and why you need to get professional help. By professional, you know, maybe I should have worded that a little differently. When I say why you need to get professional help, I'm not intending that as like you know what I mean. It's just kind of a joke. Some of us may need to get professional help. Who knows? If you write long enough and you do enough editing, you might need professional help. When I'm talking about professional help here, I'm talking about professional editing and cover design help. Then finally, number 3 is to be aware of issues related to ownership and copyright of your material. Now, cover design and ownership and copyright, those aren't technically related to editing, but I think they're part of the big picture editing process because editing just means taking something from a raw form and getting into its final form. And certainly those 2 issues are a part of that, particularly cover design. I wanted somewhere to stick the issues of ownership and copyright just because those are issues that are unique to anyone who works for an organization where they're paying you essentially to create material. So I just kind of stuck it in this session tonight. Well, here's our outline. First of all, we're going to talk about editing, and specifically we're going to talk about the issues, what is it? We're going to talk about types of editing. We're going to talk about some tools and some practices for editing.
Janet Ross.
We're going to address the question, should you pay for an editor? That's an important question. And also, I want to share with you how I edited my book, The Artist's Suitcase. Now understand, there are people who are far more experienced than I am with everything that I'm talking about here tonight. All that I'm sharing with you is my own experience, because that's really all that I have to go on. I think it's going to be really helpful to you, but understand a lot of the things I'm sharing with you are kind of my way of thinking about it and my way of doing things. If you read other people's stuff, they may share with you some different perspectives, and that's all wonderful. We can all definitely learn from each other and learn from people who even have different perspectives. Secondly, we're going to talk about cover design. And third, I want us to think briefly about copyright and ownership of material and how that might impact you as a pastor or as a church leader or as a ministry professional or educator of some type. All right, folks, you ready? Let's dive in here. The first topic that we want to address, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time tonight, is the issue of editing. And before we talk about some practical elements of editing, we first all need to kind of agree on what is editing exactly. And I believe that more than anything else, editing helps you craft the best possible version of your book. And I put that in quotation marks because that's the subtitle of our session tonight. Editing, how to craft the best possible version of your book. And without editing, you cannot have the best possible version of your book. There's just no way, because editing is an absolutely critical part of that process. If you want kind of a textbook definition of editing, here we go. Editing is preparing written material for publication by correcting, polishing, checking, modifying, or otherwise improving it. That's really the essence of what editing is somehow making corrections, improving it, or making it better in some form or fashion. Something I want to point out here, and I think this is important, is that publishing can involve a lot of things other than creating a printed book. So publishing can involve, for instance, publishing a blog post. It can involve ebooks, podcast show notes. In fact, that's a side job that I have right now, is doing podcast show notes for a popular business podcast. It can involve publishing a sermon manuscript, lesson plans, publishing on a website or a blog. It can, of course, involve printed books. Really, publishing involves anything that's for others to consume. So anytime you publish something, it doesn't just involve publishing a book that's going to be sold online or at a bookstore. It really, in the big picture of things, involves making something available for other people to consume. Now, one other thing I want to note here is that most writers don't like the editing process because it does feel like drudgery, but again, I want to emphasize that editing is where the real magic happens. You're taking something from its raw form into a form that can be consumed, into a form that is the best that you can possibly make it. So think of editing as kind of like the magic process of writing. And yes, it does involve work, as all parts of the writing process do, but I think it is a totally vital part of the writing process. Here are some types of editing, and specifically I want to point out three main types of editing. Now you could break these down probably even further, but just for sake of simplicity, let's identify three main types of editing. Now don't fall asleep on me here. Don't let your eyes glaze over. I know this is not the most exciting stuff, but I think it is really critical to get a handle on these types of editing. So first of all, we have developmental editing, and this is kind of the 30,000-foot view, if you will, the big picture view of editing. Developmental editing is mainly concerned with, you guessed it, development of material. And that involves developing ideas or developing an already existing manuscript or some type of writing piece into some type of coherent and readable work. So it can involve working with someone from the very beginning of the writing process, or it can involve something where you're taking an existing manuscript of the book and you're working with those ideas to develop those ideas to make sure they're organized, it's coherent, and it's something that makes sense. And I just noticed I have a typo in that last line. That's kind of funny in a class session on editing. That's what I get for typing these slides out so fast. So developmental editing basically involves creating, organizing, and structuring the book, not the Bach, but the book. Let's move on here. The second type of editing that I want us to look at is copy editing. So you have developmental editing, then you have copy editing, which is kind of the treetop view of editing. And copy editing is mainly concerned with revision, not development. It's mainly concerned with revising work. Copy editing deals mostly with grammar, which is the rules of English, syntax, which is word order, logic, wording, punctuation, those type of things. Also, copy editing deals with the smoothness and the flow of the writing, and it can involve reorganizing the material. Copy editing can also deal with titles, subtitles, subheads, those kinds of things. So that's more of the treetop view. Then you have the last type of editing, which is proofreading, or what I would call the ground level view of editing. Proofreading is mainly concerned with correcting something, not just developing or revising, but it's correcting at sort of the very minute level. And it's called proofreading, by the way, because in the publishing world, whenever a publisher creates a final version of a book, they do the layout and all that stuff for the printing part of it. That's called a proof. And that's the book in its final printed layout, whether it's going to be physically printed on a page or whether it's going to be printed in an ebook or something, or a PDF or something like that. And proofreading is really concerned with looking at the consistency of the style of the piece, any typographical errors, spelling, and those type of things. So it's really kind of cleaning it up and making sure it's the best possible version of the book. Now, one thing that's very important in all this process is to remember that there's overlap between these three types of editing. It's not like there's a super clean break between one and the other. You know, whenever you're doing copy editing of something, you know, you can definitely notice typographical errors, you know, spelling errors, punctuation errors, and you can correct those. Likewise, whenever you're proofreading something, you can, and this has happened to me before, where I'm just proofreading something, and I'm thinking everything is set, but then I notice, hey, there's like a gap in logic here. In fact, I remember very distinctly with my artist Suitcase book how I was just proofreading it, and in one of the chapters I noticed that something just didn't make sense. And so I had to go back and rewrite that. So, you know, I think there's an ebb and flow to this whole process. And there's not always clear lines between one type of editing and the next type of editing. Let's talk about some tools for editing. The first one is spell check, which is super, super obvious, but oftentimes overlooked. You know, spell check is available on pretty much any device we own nowadays, but so many people don't seem to bother to use it, which is kind of a shame. So spell check is very good. The next one is an app called Grammarly. Let me go to my browser so I can show you some of these. Grammarly is it's a free app, but also you can get a paid version. I just use the free version. And this basically catches mistakes, punctuation mistakes, spelling errors, repeated words, that type of thing. So this is the website for it, app.grammarly.com. Also, you can use the app. For instance, let me just give me 1 second here. Okay, this is a blog post I'm working on, actually. Let me copy that. Let me go to the Grammarly app. Let me show you what it does. Actually, I pasted some of that in there already. So I pasted in there. And let's see. Okay, it's checking. You can see right there. 1 critical issue, 3 advanced issues, and you have to upgrade to see the advanced issues, I guess. Okay. Let's go back. So there's an issue it's identified there. Obviously, you have the option to change that or not change that. But, you know, that says I need to take a look at that. So that's very, very helpful, extremely helpful. Let's go back to PowerPoint here. I'm just going to leave my PowerPoint like this because I'm going to be back and forth on my browser and some other things here really quick. So spell check, Grammarly app, the Hemingway app, which helps you clarify and simplify your writing. Now, I absolutely love this app. Now, you can get the app. I just use the web version. It's hemingwayapp.com. And the whole purpose of this tool is to make your writing bold and clear. Let me give you an example. I'm going to post this same text in the Hemingway app. And here's what it does, is it gives you these different color codings for what it's noticing in your writing. So for instance, this is highlighted as yellow, and it says 1 of 8 sentences is hard to read. Okay. This says 3 of 8 sentences are very hard to read. Okay. 1 phrase has a simpler alternative. And what's really cool is it actually gives you some alternatives when you just mouse over it. 2 adverbs, aim for 1 or fewer. Okay. Actually, this is the name of an author, not an adverb. So for instance, it's saying I should delete the word highly. And I think probably they're right. 0 uses of passive voice. So this is an extremely helpful app, and I absolutely love this because it helps you to be a more clear and succinct writer, which is always the goal, I think, in our writing. Also, another tool that I'd really recommend is called Natural Reader, which narrates your text back to you. And you can get that by going to naturalreaders.com. And you can use it just online, or I actually downloaded the app version. And for some reason it's not coming up here. Don't know what the deal is, but let me just paste it in here. And for some reason it's not letting me paste very much in there. I don't know why. By the way, this little thing down here is, sorry, I had to mute somebody real quick. This 2 down here, that's Grammarly. So anytime that I'm writing something online, Grammarly is going to be checking that, which is pretty cool. You probably cannot hear this.
One of the major topics that has consumed my mind over the...
But that's reading it back to me. I wish there was a way for you to hear that. But go to naturalreaders.com and put in some of your text. And it's pretty cool. You can choose, different voices, different speeds, which is kind of nice. And the advantage of this is when it reads your text back to you, you're going to catch things that don't make sense, or you're going to catch missing words or things that just need correcting or revising. So that's very, very helpful. And the reason why that's helpful is because when you hear something, that's different than when you read it. And essentially listening to something and reading something are 2 different ways of inputting information into your brain. So when you listen to it and read it, it's going to give you a much better chance of catching mistakes. So I think that's very helpful. Let's go to the next slide here, and I'm just going to stay in this view in PowerPoint. Helpful editing tips. Number 1 is read your book out loud to yourself, and you can use this Natural Reader app. I also think it's good to read it to yourself in your own voice, because again, you're going to catch things that you wouldn't otherwise. And if you're talking about a book that you're going to make available to other people, something that you're investing a lot of time and energy into, don't you want to make it the very best it can be? Well, I definitely do with my books. So I would highly recommend you read your whole book to yourself. That's a great way to catch mistakes. Number 2 is print your book. And the reason is because you'll catch mistakes that you wouldn't otherwise. When you read something on a screen, that's different than when you read it on a piece of paper. I don't know why that is, but I know I catch a lot of mistakes when I read something on a printed piece of paper than if I just read it on a screen. Number 3 is make sure and replace double spaces with single spaces. This is an absolutely key issue right here, because anytime that you're writing for online content, you don't need double spaces. That's something that is an old way of doing things. Nobody does that anymore in online writing, and when they do, it looks really odd. So only use single spaces. The same is also true, actually, when you're writing for self-publishing, because single spaces that's just what's used today. The double spaces are what we used, a decade or 2 ago, because that's how we were all taught to write. But I'm just telling you, replace all your double spaces with single spaces. Number 4, eliminate needless words. This is where the Hemingway app comes in. Let me go back to this. This is going to help you eliminate words that you don't really need. That's super, super helpful. Number 5 is Read the Elements of Style by Strunk and White. That's a great book if you have not read that. Let me show you the cover of that. Probably you have all heard of it, but just in case. It's only $5 on Amazon. The Elements of Style, 4th edition. I actually required this for my writing class at St. Louis Christian College because I think it is so vital. I required that as a textbook. Then the last thing I want to mention here as far as helpful editing tips is if you're in doubt about something, just search Grammar Girl. Grammar Girl is, I forget what her name is, but it's a lady who has a podcast and a website, and it is really, really helpful stuff. She's written on basically all aspects of writing and English language, so there's a bunch of stuff there. She has a podcast that's really great, but just search her website for any questions, and you'll probably find a super helpful answer. Okay, let's move on here. Those are some helpful editing tips. Let's go on to the next section. Now, this is a question a lot of people have about the editing process. Sorry, I had to take a drink. And that is, should you pay for an editor? Now, before I kind of give you my answer to this question, let me point out a key rule of life. A key rule of life, and this applies to anything that you spend money on, and it's this principle: you get what you pay for. So if you don't pay for editing, you're probably not going to get as good a result as if you do pay for editing. And the reason why editing is so vital is because if you want a professional looking book, you have to have professional level editing. Now, whether that's someone that you pay or whether it's someone who volunteers to do it but can edit at a very high level, that's totally up to you. I think the main idea is you've got to have some help with editing. A really super important rule is this: you cannot edit your own work at the highest level. So just ditch that idea, get rid of that idea out of your mind right now because it's evil. You absolutely cannot edit your own work at the highest level. Now, I think you can catch most of things if you're pretty good with English and if you're a good writer. However, there's absolutely no way that your book is going to be the best it can possibly be if only you are doing the editing of it. And hopefully that makes sense. Now, I consider myself a decent writer. I think I'm a decent editor, pretty good editor, I hope. But even I still don't catch all the mistakes within things. It's just simply impossible for you to edit your own work. Here's why, is because it's the same principle with directors and with musicians and with really anybody who's artistic. For instance, directors don't edit their own films because they're too close to it. They really need an objective person to edit their films who is an expert in that particular thing. They need someone else to take a look at it who's not the director, so that they'll come with a fresh set of eyes and really help them to put the best film possible together. Musicians do the exact same thing. Musicians typically don't produce their own work. Now, they do sometimes, but more often than not, musicians hire a producer to come in and produce their albums because that person comes in with an expert's eye. They come in with a fresh set of ears and can really help them to shape and hone that work to the very best that it can be. The reason that it's hard for you to edit your own work is because you're just simply too close to it. So again, it's helpful to have somebody else come in and take a look at it. Then the last thing here is that if you're really serious about excellence, I think you should hire an editor, especially if you're going to sell your book. I think it is super important to hire an editor if you're going to sell your book. Because, honestly, if you're selling a product, you owe it to your customer or to your reader to give them the best possible version of that product that you possibly can. So spend the money, hire an editor. I know that's not what some of you probably wanted to hear, but it's just, I believe that's really the truth. So the question is, where do you find an editor? If you're going to look for somebody to help you with it, whether it's a volunteer or whether it's somebody who you're going to pay to edit your book, where do you find an editor? Number one is to check with writers that you know. That's the first place I would look, is ask other writers who you respect and that you know, and ask where they found an editor. Number two is you can look at sites like Elance and Fiverr. However, you always want to make sure you look at the person's ratings and some other things that they've edited, and just look at their reviews, because you don't just want to hire anybody. You want to hire somebody who knows something about your style of writing and who kind of knows about your subject area at least a little bit, and who can kind of get a sense of what you're about as a person. Number 3, I would check in Facebook writing groups, because those people will have recommendations for good editors. Probably in any Facebook group of any size, you're going to actually have some people who are editors, who do that for a living or at least part-time. So that's a really, really good place to start. And one thing I would say here as well, and I think I mentioned this already, is whenever you're investigating an editor and checking people out and deciding whether you're going to hire them, always ask to see samples of that person's work and check their credentials. Who else have they edited? What sites have they edited for? What kind of work have they done in the past? And then also look at their own writing. That's probably the quickest place that you can get a sense of what somebody is like as an editor. Let me give you an example. So I think I mentioned before that I'm a lead editor for the Goodman Project, a large media site. And I had this gentleman send me an article. Actually, he sent me a pitch for an article, which is just basically a summary of the idea. He sent me a pitch a few weeks ago, and he said, hey, can I send you this article? And I said, yeah, write it up and send it to me. So he sent it to me, and it was obvious that he wasn't super gifted in things like syntax and the flow of the writing and really making sure it sounded good. There were lots of errors in it. But the funny thing was that at the bottom of his email, he listed himself as like a ghostwriter, or as a person who could help write, a master's thesis and academic type of work and things like that. And that struck me as really funny, because I thought, wow, I think you need to stop doing that side of your business because you're not very good at it, which, sounds really terrible, but it's just true. So you can immediately gauge whether someone is a good editor by looking at the kind of stuff that they have edited, and also looking at their own writing. That's just a really simple way to be able to gauge that. Not that everybody is perfect, because we all do make mistakes. We all, even in the stuff that I edit and that I write, I do still have mistakes in there sometimes. That's just kind of part of the process. But the question is, are there tons and tons of mistakes, or is there an occasional mistake that is going to slip into anybody's stuff? I mean, even professionally edited books, and books that are published by huge publishing houses, those do sometimes have mistakes in them. It's really, really hard to ferret out all those mistakes. Now, here's a question that you may be wondering, is how much does editing cost? If you're going to hire an editor for your book, what is it going to set you back? And like a lot of things, I don't have necessarily a clear answer for that. And the reason is because how much editing costs varies greatly. Wow, this is crazy. Look at this. There's another typo. It should say it varies. Instead it says it varies. Well, that's what I get for typing these out too fast, I guess. Maybe I need an editor for my own slides. Well, it varies greatly based on the editor and the project. Some editors charge per word, and some charge by the project. And I'll tell you this, that for my book, The Artist's Suitcase, which is around 120 pages, I paid around $300 for developmental editing on that book. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine named Jim Woods, did the editing for that. He is a full-time writer and editor. He did a phenomenal job on it. He was extremely helpful. He gave me, in fact, a really great story to use in the book. He suggested, hey, replace this story with a different one, and I did, and it was way better. He suggested, gosh, dozens and dozens of things through the book that were very, very helpful. And he did more developmental editing, which was working with the ideas, not so much, the copy editing and proofreading side of things, because you can't do proofreading and copy editing until you do developmental editing. And everybody does developmental editing, which is deciding the structure of the book, how it's going to flow, are the main ideas logical, is the book coherent, that kind of thing. You shouldn't do proofreading until you have, more of like a final draft of the book or something close to it. So when it comes to the expense of editing, you have to think of it as an investment and not as an expense. There's a reason why whenever we buy a new car, we sometimes, that analogy made no sense whatsoever. There's a reason why we have insurance. On any car, whether it's a new car or any car at all, is because we want to protect that investment. We want to have some kind of assurance that it's going to be protected, and that we're going to, if something happens to it, we're going to have that insurance as kind of a backup there. Editing is sort of the same thing, in the sense of that it's kind of like insurance. It's going to help ensure that we have the best product possible, the best writing possible. So editing is an investment, not so much just an empty expense. Let me walk you through a couple things about how I edited my book, The Artist's Suitcase. Again, this is not a long book. It's a very, very quick read. It'll take you a couple of hours to read through it. And I'm just sharing with you my own personal experience. Other people, other writers may have different things that they would add in here, which is awesome. But I'm just kind of sharing with you what my own experience was. And this kind of is from top to bottom. This is sort of the process I went through, at least as best as I can remember. So first of all, I hired an editor, Jim Woods. His website is jimwoodswrites.com to do some developmental editing. Basically, I sent him a draft of the book, and he went through it and made some changes, and I would make changes, then I would send them back to him, and we did this back and forth for a few weeks on it. He was very, very good. After that process was done, and really kind of simultaneously, to be honest with you, I ran the whole book, chapter by chapter, through the Hemingway app, and I revised it extensively. So I went through the whole book, I mean literally line by line. And I revised probably 70% of the sentences in the book, which, yes, that was very time-consuming. It took me probably 2 or 3 weeks to do that. I mean, working on it, not 8 hours a day, but working on it most days of the week, it took some time. But the end product of that was way better than what it was because it read a lot better, it was simpler, it was clearer, so that was really helpful. So once that was done, I ran the whole book through the Natural Reader app, which read it back to me. And again, I would catch mistakes in there, I would catch words that were missing or words that were repeated or things that didn't make sense. Again, it's just another level of insurance. Then I printed the whole book and I proofed it. So in other words, I sat down with the pen and paper and I went through the book word by word and line by line and looked for any kind of mistakes that jumped out at me. Again, the reason for that is that you catch mistakes in print that you don't catch on screen. So make sure you print out your writing when you're editing it. Now, I don't do that with blog posts and that kind of stuff, but I do it with anything that I'm going to sell, certainly. And then I read the whole book aloud to myself. Again, chapter by chapter and line by line. Is it time-consuming? Yes. But is it worth it? Yes. Now, that was all self-editing, well, except for Jim Woods, who was the paid editor. Also, and this was a very important step, I had about half a dozen people read through the whole book to find any mistakes of any kind, whether it was mistakes of logic or whether it was things that just didn't make sense, things that didn't flow, spelling errors, punctuation errors, whatever it was. I just asked them to give me feedback and tell me what needed correcting. And basically what I did is I just emailed my whole email list and I said, hey, I'm working on a book. Anybody who would like to have a free copy of it, at the draft stage, let me know and I will email it to you. And several people took me up on that offer. And the cool thing about that was that every single person caught mistakes that other people did not catch. And I thought that was very interesting, which proved to me that there's not one person who can catch all the mistakes in a written work. It really takes a multitude of people to read through it and catch as many mistakes as possible. Let me get a drink really quick here. Okay, sorry about my little choking fit there. Maybe I'll edit that out. So here's the bottom line with editing. I know some of you are probably thinking, wow, this is like really going to require a major commitment of time from me. This is way more than I had planned on or thought of doing. But here's just the bottom line, and I'm just here to tell you the truth about this. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If all this sounds like a lot of work, it's because it is a lot of work. It is time-consuming. It is at times kind of exhausting because that's what editing is. However, and this is a huge, huge however, the real question is, how good do you want your final product to be? Do you want to put something out there that has a lot of typos in it, or that is not, that doesn't flow as well as it could? Do you want something that has mistakes in it, or do you want something that is as pristine and as well written and well edited as you can possibly make it? And the reason why that's an important question is because a book is not just going to be around for 6 months. A book is going to be around for years possibly decades, possibly forever in some type of form. So whenever people in 10 years pick up my book, I want it to be as good as possible. I don't want to be embarrassed because there's a bunch of mistakes in it. I want it to be as good as it possibly can be. So then what happens if you're not good at this? What happens if you're not a good editor? What happens if you're not good at grammar and spelling and punctuation? Well, the answer is that you find some people to help you with that. Find some friends to help you with it. Find some people in a writing group. Ask some people in this class, in the Facebook group, hey, would you be interested in reading my stuff? I'll read your stuff. Do kind of a swap there. The point is not to be the best writer in the world. The point is that you understand what you're good at and you understand what you're not good at. And then the things that you're not good at, you get help on. And that is really how it works. There's a lot of people who are very successful authors who are not very good writers. And I've read some of them. And, that's okay because you don't have to be the best writer in the world. You just have to be willing to take steps to correct things where you're not strong and get help when you need it. And the truth is that we all need help with editing. There's not one single person in this class tonight or who's taken this class in general who can perfectly edit their own work all the time. I just don't think it's really possible. And even if you could, why would you want to? Why would you not want to benefit from having another set of eyes or a half dozen set of eyes on your work to improve it? All right, enough about editing. Let's move on to cover design. Here's the key truth about cover design in your book. Unless you are very good with graphic design, you need to hire this out or have it done by someone else who has professional level skills or near professional level skills. Now that's a very strong statement, I realize, but there's a very simple reason that I say this, and it is that people judge a book by its cover. I cannot tell you how many times I've looked at a book and been interested in it because it had an awesome cover. And also, the opposite of that, how many times have all of us looked at a book and it had a terrible cover and we just immediately dismissed it out of hand? So people do judge a book by its cover. So if you're going to spend money on one thing, I would spend it on cover design. If I had to pick between editing and cover design, I would have a bunch of friends do my editing for me and help me with it, but then I would definitely pay for cover design. So how much did I pay for the cover design for my book, The Artist's Suitcase? By the way, let me just show you a cover of it. I'll just go to Amazon. Just going to try and find the file on my computer, but I'll just go to Amazon. For those of you who haven't seen the cover, I had a person, a graphic designer named Christy Griffith, design the cover for me. Let me do a little bit bigger version. So that's the cover. And it was not cheap. I paid around $250 total for the front and the back cover. So this is, obviously this is the front cover. I wonder if it'll show the back cover. Let me see if I can scroll to the back cover real quick here. It may not. Oh, here we go. It's on the left here. I didn't even see it. Here's the back cover. So when you have a book cover design, remember, you have the front and the back as well as the spine, which you can't obviously see here. So when you have the cover design, it's not just the title and the the image on the front and your name. It's also all this stuff on the back, which is blurbs from people. I have a little bio here. You have the ISBN. You have kind of a description of what the book is, and this is where the marketing comes into play, where you're not just saying what the book is and spelling out the features of something. And again, this is a basic marketing thing. Don't talk about the features of the product. Talk about the benefits. So again, I don't go through here and say, I have a chapter on this and this and this. Rather, I wanted to hopefully draw in the potential reader and say something that was going to entice them to read the book, which is why I use a term like, in this game-changing guide for creative people you'll discover, and I listed some things they'll discover. The 4 questions you should ask when you're criticized, a strategy for making failure your best friend, why you must learn to say no and take back control of your time, In the artist Suitcase, Kent Sanders pulls back the curtain on creativity and shows you the essentials and bite-sized chapters. Prepare to reignite your creative life. So even phrases like bite-sized chapters, that's highlighting a feature of the book. People like bite-sized stuff. Now this seems like it's very short. This is not very much text, but actually this took a long time to write. And I actually had some feedback on this from many people. And when you're doing a book cover, you have to think about all these things. But I think this stuff is really fun. To me, it's really, really cool when you get to this stage and you're designing the book cover and it just feels very real, and I think it's a blast to do that. Anyway, back to the front cover. I thought Christy did a great job with this cover. She actually, let me mute a couple people here. Christy actually produced, probably 6 or 7 different designs, not even just versions of this cover, but she produced a whole bunch of different, totally different designs of the book. And we landed on this one. I got a bunch of feedback from people on what they liked the best. And I love this cover. I thought she did a great job with it. So anyway, back to the main point, is that cover design is worth paying for. And I thought $250 was a steal because she's an amazing graphic designer. She does it professionally. She's very, very good. So where do you find a designer? Well, you can look on Elance. You can look on Fiverr. You can ask people in Facebook groups, friends who are writers. Really, I think that's the best way to do it, is first of all, ask people that you know who've had books made and covers designed and things like that, and ask them if they know anybody who they think would be good for your project. And I would definitely, go that route. But I am really, really convinced that it's worth it to hire a graphic designer for a book, particularly if you're going to sell it. Now, there is one exception to this. I think if you're doing a giveaway book for your blog, and you're pretty good at design and you feel comfortable with it, you can create a simple cover for it. I did this with my blog opt-ins, which I'll show you in just a second. But I also spent a lot of time on them, and I got lots of feedback when I did the covers. And really the bottom line here is that if you're going to sell your book, invest in a professional-looking cover. It'll absolutely be the best money that you spend on your book. Let me kind of show you what I mean by these opt-in ebooks. So an opt-in is literally some type of book or digital product. Could be a course, it could be a podcast episode, it could be whatever. An opt-in is something that you give people whenever they literally opt in to your email list. So when you go to my website, this is the thing you see at the top. All these books here are called opt-ins. These are just simply ebooks. I designed all these covers myself. It actually took quite a long time to do these, and I'll show you how I did this in just a second. I wanted them all to match, and to have kind of a cohesive look to them. I thought they turned out pretty well. I like them. I'm not what I would consider a really great graphic designer by any stretch, but I wanted something I could do that was simple, that didn't look bad. I don't think these look bad at all. They're not the best thing in the world, but I think they're pretty serviceable, and I think at least they don't look bad. Now, how I did this is I used a site called Canva. Let me go there and I'll kind of show you. C-A-N-V-A, canva.com. And this is where I do a lot of graphic design stuff. Again, I'm not really a great graphic designer, but they have on Canva a ton of templates. Let's say if I was going to create a new design, they have all these templates you can choose from that have pre-made sizes. For instance, if you want to do, let's see, let's say a poster. Again, I know we're talking about ebook covers, but it's the same principle. They have all these pre-made designs you could pick from that are pretty cool. So let's say if I wanted to use this one. Click on that one, then you can manipulate all these elements. You can change the colors, change the pictures, and whatever. You've got elements over here to pick from. You've got text, you've got backgrounds. By the way, you have all these different types of text. Some of them are paid, a lot of them are free. So you could maybe put this over here and change the color. So if you're good with graphic design, or at least okay with it, this is a really, really great tool where you can create something that looks pretty good, but you don't have to start from scratch. So I love Canva. It is an awesome tool. Let me go back to my designs. Let me kind of show you something. So these ebooks that I mentioned, they started out with a totally different design. Let me wait till they come up here. Okay. So you'll notice, let me do this here real quick. Okay. So you can kind of compare these. There's that. Let me go back here. So you can sort of compare these. Let's see. They got a bunch of cool designs there. All right, so this is how to make time for your art. This is how to make time for your art right here. You can see these are two completely different designs. And I just originally did these in different colors, which I really liked. But I ran this by a couple of people, and they didn't like them that much. And I thought to myself, man, I just spent like hours creating these ebook covers, which I thought were pretty cool. But a couple of people said, they're not really as good as you think they are. I think you need to go back to the drawing board. So I thought, okay. So then I came up with these designs, which were, just a lot simpler. The series is called Short Guides for Busy Artists because I wanted it to seem like, just calling it a series and giving the series a title makes it sound a little more professional. So I just chose a simple image, and I got these images, by the way, all from Canva. I just searched the images, and I tried to match I tried to have a color scheme for each book. So like in this stopwatch, there's kind of a metallic grayish color. That's why I made the text this color. My name is in black on each one. Kind of a brownish sort of color. I never actually used that one. I kind of like that one though. This is a green color for that, and so forth. So you kind of get the point. I don't need to belabor that. All right, let's go back to these slides here. Let's dive into one more quick issue tonight, and that is the issue of who actually owns your material. This really isn't tied in with editing directly, but I think it's important to cover this with this group because you all are ministry professionals, you're teachers, you're pastors. Some of you work for organizations that pay you to create content. For instance, I do. I work for St. Louis Christian College, and literally my job, part of my job at least, is creating content for classes. And some of you are in similar positions. And this really comes down to the idea of intellectual property. Who really owns the material that you're producing? This may not be something that you've thought of before, but it's something that you really should think about. If you have any intention on taking content that you have written or created for someone else who's paid you for that service, and if you're going to publish that or distribute it in some form or fashion, you need to be clear on this whole issue. So some employers have specific guidelines about ownership. For instance, at St. Louis Christian College, our employee handbook does state that the school owns the material that we create for classes. And there's part of me that kind of goes, oh, that's a bummer, I don't own the material, but really that's really never bothered me that much. I guess because there's not a lot of stuff in my classes that I would take and transfer that exactly into an ebook or some type of product. Now, I might take something and revise it hugely or put it into a whole different, put a whole different spin on it or something like that. Maybe I'll do that in the future. If I do, then I'll have to come to some kind of agreement with my college on, who owns that material, who receives the profits from it, that whole ball of wax. That hasn't happened yet. With my book, The Artist's Suitcase, that was not something I created for a St. Louis Christian College class. It was something that I used as a required textbook for my class. Students didn't pay for it because it wasn't published at that point. It was just in rough draft form. But I required them to read it for my Introduction to the Arts class. So in that way, I've used stuff that I've created outside of class. I've used that stuff in class. But I've never taken something that I've created specifically for a class and sold that or really distributed it somewhere that I can remember. Maybe I have, but I don't remember. At most, it would be using something on my blog or something like that. Obviously, that's not something anybody pays for. So if you're going to distribute or copy the material or sell it, make sure that you're free and clear on that, and make sure that you have the rights to do that. You know, the honest truth is that most churches and most colleges, most organizations really could care less what you do with that material. They're not going to check up on it. They're not going to question you on it. It will not even occur to the vast majority of people that this might even be an issue. However, I do think it's a matter of integrity. If you work for a place that's paying you to create content, I do think as a matter of integrity, if they say that they own the material, you've got to figure out what you're going to do with that if you're going to republish or distribute that material. What else do I want to say about this? One more thing is, if you're not sure if you own the material or not, I think it's always safest to assume nothing. So never assume that you actually own the material. If there's any question about ownership, I would say get an agreement in writing between you and your organization or church or college or whatever. And, you know, I would even say it's not a bad idea to have it reviewed by an attorney. Now, I know that's, to some people, that sounds very extreme because, you know, we work in Christian environments and we all want to trust each other and blah, 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 and that's all good, you know. But the reality is that you really never know what's going to happen, and I think it's better to be safe than sorry. And what I mean by sorry is you would never want to assume that you own something, then let's say you publish it or you distribute it somewhere, and then somewhere someone else at your organization assumes that you don't own it, and well then you're kind of in hot water, or you've got an issue you've got to deal with. So I think when you get something in writing when it comes to ownership of material, if you want to redistribute it or publish it, I think when it comes to that issue, you know, it helps everybody just to get it in writing so everybody's on the same page. Nobody has the wrong expectations or whatever. I mean, at the very least, if the organization doesn't care what you do with it, then just get that in writing. Get that in some sort of written policy or something. Again, some of you may think that sounds kind of extreme, but and I've never run into this issue with my college at all. I'm pretty sure my college would not be concerned about this issue. However, I've never really asked about it. So I do know that if I were to ever want to make money off of what I've done for classes, I would, you know, just need to have the integrity to figure out what to do with that and to make sure that's okay with someone at my college to do that, for me to do that. Hopefully that'll make sense. Just think it's an integrity issue. Well, here are some action steps for tonight. The first thing is to review the slides and choose one or two editing tips or tools to use this week. If I was going to pick one, I would probably use either the Grammarly app or the Hemingway app. Probably I would go with Grammarly because that'll catch immediate mistakes, but if you want to kind of go a little bit beyond that, use the Hemingway app and just see what you think about it. I think you'll really enjoy it. Also, share your results in the Facebook group. What did you think about some of these tools when you used them? What were the results? And do you have any tools to share that I haven't thought of tonight? My guess is that you probably do, so share those in the Facebook group. Well, folks, we're just about out of time tonight. So let me just wrap this up by saying next week's topic, we've got 2 weeks left. Next week's topic is going to be on formatting. So once you have your book in the final format, you know, it's all edited, it's corrected, all the errors are out of it, the text is the way that you want it. Once you have your book cover designed, then what are the next steps? And that's what we're going to talk about next week. How to bring your book to life in ebook, print, and audio versions. Now, let me say this up front about next week's session is that I'm not going to be able to go through every technical process involved in that because all of those things are highly technical processes. So I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of how to do an ebook, how to do a print book, and how to do an audio book. And if you want to follow up with that, then we can do something separate, I suppose. But I just want to give you kind of an overview so you have some resources to know where to head if you want to follow through with those things. So, folks, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for your time and attention. God bless you guys, and I will see you next week.